Oh, there you go.
All right, everyone. Thanks for hopping on. I know a bunch of you will watch the recording as well, but we did one of these with Precision a couple years ago, and I just wanted to get Sean back on because we got a bunch of new members and just we've converted a lot of people over to Precision the last few years. I use it pretty much exclusively for all my long distance racing events, whether it's marathon, Ironman 70.3, and I can just speak volumes to the amount of people like that I've coached who have switched over from other products to Precision Fuel and Hydration and have noticed like massive differences in terms of the removing all the GI issues they have and being able to take on higher carb totals, which we know in these endurance sports, a lot of us doing mostly hour and a half to 10, 12, 17-hour events. That makes a huge difference in performance and recovery from our workouts and stuff. So I know Sean will talk a bit about it, but some big announcements with Precision and Ironman recently. I know lots of you race Ironman events, so some exciting stuff there. And yeah, just they're doing so many great things from the educational side too. So make sure you're hopping on their website and subscribe to all their emails and stuff too. They send out awesome stuff there too. So I'll send it over to Sean. He's going to do a little probably 30-minute presentation here, and we'll have some Q&A at the end. But I'll let him take it from here.
Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you everyone for turning up. I know it's evening time for you guys. It's only 3 p.m. for me. Um, Now, despite what Mark said, thank you very much for the very kind words, Mark. This isn't a sales pitch, so this is an educational presentation, really about general hydration and fueling for any endurance event that you're doing. And I work for Precision Hydration, but if you use other products, that's okay. I'm not going to be pushing our products per se in this. We try and keep the two things separate, education and sales. So I will be, of course, using our products as an example, but if you're using other products, then just plug those in where appropriate. So kicking off, we are going to talk today about hydration and fueling, and we'll start off with hydration. And I guess the key thing to start off with is, what are electrolytes? So we've got four minerals we primarily talk about when we talk about electrolytes: sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, and they're all fundamentally important to the body. And you get most of them, as long as you've got a healthy diet, you get most of them in with your diet. But when you're doing any kind of endurance sport, the critical thing is sodium, because we don't lose enough of the other minerals to affect our performance unless it's an absurdly long kind of event. But for most of us, we're doing, even if you're doing 18 hours in an Ironman, you're fully engrossed for the day. Your main issue is going to be sodium, not the others. And for example, have you ever seen anyone with a potassium cramp? You're not finishing that event. You're going off in an ambulance because your body's completely seized up. Whereas sodium, we've all had the effects of sodium depletion, and that can manifest itself in a number of ways. But the most common way when we talk about it is cramp. Now, we as a company never represent that replacing sodium is going to resolve a cramping issue, because it's not true. We can't actually test for what causes cramp most commonly, because ethics boards of at universities, when we try and go in for studies, won't, it's such a painful test, won't allow it to proceed. So what we do know is number of factors, and you can see them on the screen here. The most common are three factors. The easiest one to deal with actually is sodium. And sodium's a binary, yes or no. If you are experiencing cramp and you take a very, very high sodium solution, it'll either resolve the cramp or it won't. And then you can tick it off, yeah, that fixed the problem. If it didn't fix the problem, as an amateur athlete, it's likely one of two other issues. The first one is um, carbohydrate depletion in the muscles. We're going to talk about carbohydrates in a minute, but you're out doing a marathon or a 70.3 or an Ironman or something, and you're not replacing carbohydrates at the same level that you're using them. then your muscles, and you store carbohydrates as glycogen in your muscles are going to start complaining at some point when you've depleted them, and that complaint manifests as a cramp, and a lot of people might have experienced that. And the other most common cause of cramps in amateur athletes, very sad to say this, and I actually experienced this last Sunday, is lack of conditioning for the event that you're doing. I did the California International Marathon on Sunday, and I had the classic 5K to go. Didn't seize up with a cramp, but lack of conditioning slowed my pace down considerably because I hadn't trained properly. Well, I didn't have enough time, but that I had a lot of fun, so it didn't really matter. So they're the three most common causes of cramp, but of course, lots of other factors affect cramping, and you should be aware of all of them. But when you're trying to sort of resolve the issue, think about those three first. So whenever we're going into events, we want to start fully hydrated, and we want to preload. And I'm using the 1500, the PFNH 1500 as an example. But you want to start with a high sodium preload, very much like a carb preload. Now, one of the reasons we ask people to do this is because our experience with all sorts of athletes, amateurs, elites, professionals, doesn't matter who they are, in the 72 hours before any kind of event, people sort of change behavior and start drinking like there's no tomorrow. If you go to any kind of registration expo, you'll see people walking around with, 2-liter jugs and 64-ounce jugs of water, just chugging it away. Because all they're thinking about is I've got to stay hydrated for this event. Now, the downside of that is, if you're just drinking water, you sort of start to dilute your system of all the electrolytes. And then you get on the start line in a pretty poor state. And we can try and educate people not to do that, but it's a bit like putting your finger in a dike. People just do it as a nervous reaction. So the best way to do it is counteract the effect and take a really high sodium solution in 2 loads before your event. One the night before, 500 ml of water with 1 tab of 1500, 750 milligrams of sodium, and exactly the same in the morning. The timing really depends on your logistics, whether you're close to the event, what kind of event it is, but you can carry the bottle with you and get that load in. And what that does, it preloads your system with sodium, gets your levels back up. So when you actually start the race, you're in a great state to go forward. So that's a brief chat about hydration. We're going to come back to hydration in a moment. Oh no, we're going to come to it now. Sorry. And the reasons for this, is it encourages water retention. When you add sodium ions to water molecules, they'll get absorbed in body cells. Increases blood plasma volume, which is fundamentally important. We want blood plasma volume to be optimal, carries oxygen and nutrition to the muscles. And of course, if you reduce your blood plasma volume, you increase your cardiovascular load because your blood's thicker. You've got to pump that thicker blood around the body. So that's primarily the reasons we do that. Now, switching across to fueling, where we were on preloading for hydration. And fueling, of course, is a similar thing. And I did this on Thursday and Friday last week. When you're carb loading, you're doing a very, very similar thing, but you're doing it much further out, 2 to 3 days prior. Personally, I like to do it, say I'm racing on Sunday, I like to preload my carbs on the Thursday and Friday and just go normal on the Saturday. That's my own personal preference because I can't take a heavy carb load the day before a race. So I just kind of keep my levels high, but I'm not doing the 8 to 12 kilograms per grams per kilo body weight. I'm doing that on the sort of 72 and 48-hour days before, and the 24 hours I'm sort of back to normal. But 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilo per day is a lot of carbohydrates. I'm 70 kilos. We're talking 850 odd kilos of carbs. And that's, no fat, no protein in addition. That's essentially 3 meals a day, breakfast, mid-morning snack, lunch, afternoon snack, evening meal. We're talking boring, white rice. You want to reduce the fat and fiber in that particular period. Drink mix, Haribo. Yeah, you feel gross actually when you're doing it because it's not the best, it's not the healthiest food. But you're just building up those glycogen stores, and we store glycogen, just for reference, in two places in our body. We store it in our liver and in our muscles. Well, the amount we store in assuming you're an average person about my size, I would store about 500 grams of carbs. Carb converts at 4 calories per gram, so does protein. Fat converts at 9 calories a gram. And so I would store about 500 grams with a good preload, maybe a little bit more. And of that, again, everyone's going to be different, but roughly 150 grams of that would be stored in my liver and about 350 in my muscles. The 150 in my liver is primarily for body function. The brain takes quite a bit of glycogen to function. It uses 25% of the body stores, and normal body function. And then the 350 in your muscles, basically on the start line, that's roughly what you've got to kick off with. Your job as an athlete is not to let that get to zero. So that's going to inform your fueling strategy for that particular event. And you've got to figure out in your training and at your intensity what kind of carb utilization your body's going to take up during whatever your pacing and your zone is during the actual event. And obviously, the shorter the event, the less requirement, but also the higher intensity. So more sugar is burned, more glycogen. The longer event, the more likely you're going to be in zone 1, zone 2. So you're going to be, if you're metabolically efficient, you're going to be burning more fat. And so your carb utilization is going to be slightly lower. But again, everybody has different fitness levels. Everybody has different metabolic efficiency. So you've got to figure that out for yourself. The night before the race, you want to switch down to about 1.4, 1 to 4, that should be grams, not milligrams, of carbohydrate per kilo body weight. And then the final top up is just before caffeine, if you want it, but just before the race start, around 15 minutes before, keep a carb gel on you. If you're in a triathlon, just slip it up your wetsuit sleeve, and you're in the pen, and then just get that down. You got your goggles on, your hat on, get it in then just before the start of the race. Now, what will this do? As we mentioned, it maximizes those glycogen stores in the muscles and liver. And that last one gives you that final boost of blood glucose to spare those stores. So one of the reasons the timing is important of that final one is, the products we sell, and the products companies like us sell, highly processed sugars, a gel is not a healthy food. It's not something that wants to be part of your regular diet. When you're training and doing your base training, you want to eat real food. Gels are, particularly unhealthy foods as part of a normal diet. We wouldn't recommend them. And that's why we don't recommend them to children and to, pregnant women. You want healthy food. But the reason they're so effective and they're so dynamically important is because of that high processing. Your stomach has got the least amount of work to do when that gel hits it, and it's absorbed almost immediately through the gut and made available through the small intestine to the muscles. Now, when you take something like a gel or a can of Coke or whatever, if you're a normal, healthy human being, you're going to get an insulin response. Insulin manages blood sugar levels in a normal, healthy person and drives those sugar levels down. Now, if you take that gel 40 minutes before the start of your race, what's going to happen is that blood enters your bloodstream, insulin kicks in, starts lowering your blood sugar levels, gun goes off, you're in the race, blood sugar levels dropping. Not a good situation. By leaving it to a shorter period before the race starts, say 15 minutes, the gel hits your stomach, goes through into the system, hits the bloodstream, blood sugar levels are spiking, the gun goes off, you hit in, bang. Now the body's like going to back it up with glycogen release because blood sugar levels are rising, but you're putting out a lot of effort and it's going to support that with a flow of glycogen into the system. So that's why timing of that last gel is very, very important to manage those glycogen reserves and manage your fueling needs. Now, we often get a lot of questions about, does the type of carb matter? And essentially, no, it doesn't. The carb comes in many, many forms, many different molecules, different structures. But essentially, at the end of the day, it's a sugar molecule, and your body's going to take it up. The primary customizations for individuals are as a function of your own personal needs and your own personal taste. So it's not really about the molecule, it's about you as an individual. Some people don't like a sweet thing. Some carbs cause them gastrointestinal distress. Some of them have a different absorption speed, so it might affect your performance. So that's something that you've got to work out as an individual. And that's where the difference between sodium and carbohydrate becomes so important as an individual. Sodium is almost universally accepted, and most people don't have any problems with it. Carbohydrates are very, very personal. So that's where it comes down to, we sell our gels, but our gels might not work for you. You might get on better with Maurten or GU or Scratch or Tailwind. It's very, very important that you work out what particular carbs in a race work best for you and you stick with it. And that's why it's so important to have that identified before you go to a race. So although if you're doing Ironman, our sodium is on all the courses, but it's Maurten is the gel manufacturer. And if Maurten isn't something that works for your body, then you want to make sure that you take carbs with you and you control all the carbs you take in, and you don't have to take them off the course and cause yourself problems. So that's the primary function that's going to inform your particular type of carbs is your personal needs and your personal taste. The sugar molecule shouldn't really matter. Same endpoint. So back to drinking, and we're going to come back to carbs again in a minute in terms of volume. So one of the things we're famous for is doing sweat tests on people. And that's how we started. And we started off testing professionals in all sorts of sports, NFL, NBA, Formula One, Premier League. And we test teams, and now we test amateur athletes as well and elite athletes, anyone who wants to test. And what we test for is sodium concentration. We're all unique. When we take a sample of your sweat and we analyze it, we'll see a particular amount of sodium in that sweat, and we can measure how much sodium you lose per liter of sweat. Now, most people think their sweat sodium concentration changes, but it doesn't, because sweat isn't the regulator of sodium in the body. The kidney is. So if you had a high sodium meal and you did some exercise, your sweat concentration would remain the same. But if you urinated, you'd see a change, over time in your sodium content of your urine, because your kidney is managing that sodium content in your body. So when we take that sweat concentration as a measurement in of itself, it's not really that important unless we apply it to two other components. One is and that sweat concentration is fixed and is genetically determined. For example, mine is 685 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat, which is relatively low. What you have to then measure, and something you can do on your own, is sweat rate, the volume of sweat you lose in particular environments. Now, sweat rate is highly variable, as you well know. In Ontario and BC at the moment, it's pretty chilly. If I went out, it was a cloudy day, as it always is in BC at this time of year. If I went out for a run today, it's probably 6 degrees. I would probably lose about 500 mil of sweat per hour. But if I was to sort of drop into Miami right now and go for a run, I'd probably lose about 2 liters an hour, because completely different environment. I'm not acclimated to that environment. So I'm just going to sweat more until I acclimate, and then I'll come back to my balance. My particular balance is something I know because I've tested it. And the way to test it ideally is using a treadmill or doing it on Zwift on your bike, doing it in a fixed environment for an hour. Weigh yourself naked before you start your session. Do an hour, but you don't have to do an hour. You can do it as long as you like. There's a spreadsheet on our website. Just search for how do I measure my sweat rate. And you can put in all sorts of parameters in there. But basically, I'll do it for an hour. Wear yourself naked, get on, do your session. Don't change anything. Keep the fan on, keep the fluid coming in. And at the end of the session, wear yourself naked again because you don't want the weight of the sweat on your clothes. Dry yourself off. Take your start weight, subtract the end weight, and add in any fluid you drank, sorry. So in my case, if I was 70 kilos, did an hour, get off, I weigh 69, I drank 500 ml of fluid. That's 1.5 kilos of mass, which translates to 1.5 liters. Thankfully, we're in Canada, we're in metric, so you understand that. If I was in America, I'd have to do it in ounces, much more difficult. But if you do want to do it in ounces, use that spreadsheet and it'll calculate it for you. Excuse me. Now, the next thing we need to factor in, we've got those two numbers, is the duration of your event, because each event's going to be very, very different. And the best way to describe that particular thing is we could have someone with a massive sodium loss rate. I'm 685. Let's say they're 22,000 milligrams per liter. That's a huge amount of sodium loss. And let's also say that athlete loses 3 liters an hour, which is again extreme. Some people do, but it's an extreme amount. So that effective loss rate per hour to 2,000 milligrams, 2 grams times 3 liters is 6 grams per hour. That's excessive. We're talking like 0.05% of the population. But imagine that athlete's name is Usain Bolt. Well, then it wouldn't matter. He could just drink water because his event is 10 seconds long. And, the counter example of that is, say, some East African female runner who loses 500 milliliters an hour. She's tiny, 50 kilograms. She loses maybe 400 milligrams of sodium per liter. But she's an endurance runner, trail runner, and her event is 30 hours long. And so she indicates a very, very low sodium loss. But because of her event and sweat loss, and because of her event, 30 hours, she can't ignore sodium because you can lose 8 to 10 grams of sodium during that event. Again, it's not outrageous, but it's something she has to manage. So that's why putting those three numbers together is fundamentally important. Then, do you need to replace all of it? No, you don't. We're trying to hit about 70% of our replacement levels. But if none of you have had a sweat test before, a great place to start is assume you lose roughly 1,000 milligrams. And I can say that with confidence because we've done over 30,000 sweat tests. And of course, a bell curve establishes itself. The median at the moment is 985 milligrams. And the 90th percentile in that bell curve is between 780 milligrams and 1,100. You're going to be somewhere in there. The 90% chance you're going to be somewhere in there. So if you take a starting point of roughly 1,000 milligrams per liter of sodium loss, and then iterate out from there, it's a great starting point just to get a feel for what you need during your events. Again, coming back to that carb question we had before, does the source of sodium matter? Same as the source of carbs? Really, it doesn't. A lot of people want to take Himalayan rock salt. It's great. Himalayan rock salt is a lovely thing, but your body doesn't care if it's a packet of sodium or a packet of salt from McDonald's. If you need salt and you crack open a packet of salt from McDonald's, your body will be as happy as it would be if you used Himalayan rock salt. So don't get too precious about this stuff. When you need it, you need it. And it's much more important to get in the right concentration for your particular needs than the source of the sodium. Now, we talked about how much sodium we need, how much fuel do we need for a particular event. And that's really a function of, the intensity and the duration. As intensity increases, you've probably all heard of the lactate curve. Our ability to use fat decreases as you go along the lactate curve, and we start preferring glycogen conversion or sugar. And everybody's going to be different along that curve because we have different efficiencies. But as intensity goes up, we tend to use much more sugar to fuel that exercise. And as duration extends, our volume of requirement also goes up. So here's a very, very simple graph. Really, up to 60 minutes, you don't need any carbohydrate. And I would say up to about 75 minutes, even sodium, you don't need sodium or carbohydrate really, especially in your base training. I'm going to contradict that in a moment. But as you can see, as you go up, we're getting to 30 grams, and then 60 grams, then 90 grams for some people. We're going to talk about increasing your carb intake in a moment. But where I'm going to contradict myself with the small amounts, the only time you start taking, for example, gels and whatever you're going to use, is when you get specific about your race. And that's usually in the last 2 blocks before race day. So most people train on a 3-1 cycle, 3 build, 1 recovery, and a block is usually 4 weeks. You might be different, and leading into a race, you might have 2 weeks of taper. So your specificity block is 10 weeks. And 10 weeks out is when you want to start doing 2 things. And we're going to talk about the second thing in a moment. But the first thing is getting specific about your products you're going to use. So whatever products you've decided to use for your race, in those 10 weeks before the race is when you start using them uniformly for all your training. And even if you're doing a 60-minute session, a run or a bike ride, you would start using a gel, say 30 minutes in, you'd actually use it because what you're doing is building a habit, getting your body used to it. So your body doesn't actually need it, but that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is to build a habit. So that's where we would contradict this, and for the small amounts you start using them. The second part of that, of course, is in that 10-week block, is training the gut to absorb, accept the volume you want to take in. I would argue that 60 grams is the absolute minimum you want to be taking in for most events. And the longer the event and the higher the performance level, the more carbs you want to take in. We work with Tour de France riders who are now taking in, through a grand tour, 120 grams an hour, 6 hours a day, 3 weeks in a row. Now, I'm not arguing that you need to do that. But if you are going to get up to a higher level, and most amateur athletes are trying to get up to about 90, you can't just go in and do that. You need to train your gut using the products in the format that you're going to target for the race. And you should do that again about 10 weeks out from the race. Start that gut training protocol, slowly increasing it, and actually going past what your intention is for the race, making sure you're comfortable with that, and then pulling back a bit for the race. And then you can be very, very comfortable. Know you're going into that race with the volume of carbs your stomach can deal with at that particular race, at that particular intensity for that particular race. So, bear that in mind when you are training. Don't wait until 3 or 4 weeks out. Be easy on your body. Be patient with yourself. Get your body used to what you're asking it to do in the race. How do you carry all of this stuff? Well, that's for you to work out. But if you're doing an Ironman, for example, what I always recommend is you get together on a table. This 10 weeks out from your race, you pile up on a table this is 3 steps. Pile up on a table all the products you like to use. Then you make a second pile of, based on how many grams an hour you're going to take in and the duration of your event. So say you're doing an Ironman, your target time is 10 hours, your intake target is 90 grams an hour, that's 900 grams. So you take from that 90 grams an hour, 900 grams, and you put that in your second pile. And your next job now is determining, how the hell you're going to carry this stuff. Luckily in a triathlon, luckily in an Ironman or a 70.3 maybe, you can use special needs and get some of it stored in your bag at the halfway point on the bike, so you don't have to carry it all. and some of it you're going to need in T2, ready for the run. But your job is to figure out in that, if your target was 900 grams, when you're going to eat it, where it's going to go, and how you're going to use it. And how you're going to use it is an important factor to consider because most people, have difficulty maintaining. If you're trying to hit 90 grams an hour on the bike, for example, most people have a difficulty maintaining that on the run. You're fatigued at that point. There's biomechanical load on your stomach. So most people tend to use gels on the run and tend to use other formats on the bike because you can just carry them easier. There's less biomechanical load on your body. So that's when you have chews, more drink mix, more bars. So just consider that as well when you're planning your race. And that, in a nutshell, is it. To get an idea of what you need to use, you can go onto our website. There's a fuel and hydration planner. I'd use 1,000 milligrams as your starting point, and then put in your parameters for your particular race and see what it generates. Bear in mind that it is an algorithm. It'll only get it's about 85% accurate for most people, but use it as your starting point, start training at that level, and then iterate from there. And when you're doing your C and B races, start using that particular volume for that race, and then as you dial it in and you iterate, then you'll have a base model for your A race, and hopefully in your A race you'll pull it off and you get to Kona if you're trying to get to Kona. That is it for today. Questions? Hopefully I'm not too far over. 33 minutes.
I have a question. Hi.
Hi, Erin. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So I know you touched on caffeine at the beginning of the swim, but I was wondering, I don't currently use caffeine, but I was wondering if there's a specific amount that you should target for 70.3 specifically.
Yeah, around about looking at your body size, Erin, it probably 300 milligrams would be optimal for someone your size. And caffeine has a very, very good science behind it. And we use caffeine primarily it helps with fat absorption, fat conversion. But one of the other reasons we use it is for concentration. So the thing to do with caffeine is be strategic about it and be aware that it has a half-life. Of course, your caffeine, in my case, I'm very intolerant to caffeine because I drink so much of it. But if you are like yourself and not tolerant to caffeine, it's going to have a much faster effect on you. But most people it's around about 45 minutes, so you've got to plan it. So one of the reasons you might take a caffeine gel at the start of the swim is because it's going to start to kick in when you come out of the water. One of the reasons you want that is because it's going to affect your concentration and get you zoned in. So when you get into T1, where you need to concentrate, you want to get your helmet off at the right time before you move your bike, all the other things. It's going to have a good effect. And again, you might take your second caffeine gel just before you get off the bike, so it kicks in right about the middle of the run. And that's an important time because usually at the start of the run, you're kind of right in the zone. You're right on pace because you just started it. And the last kind of 3 or 4K of the run, you're really in the zone because you just want to get this thing done. But in the middle of the run is when you start to drift off. You're running along and you think, oh, that's a nice dog, and I wish I lived in that house. You kind of start to daydream a little bit, and the caffeine kicks in then, and it starts to sort of help you with your concentration, so you can bring, in this particular case, you can get your pace back on target. So caffeine is important, it has good science behind it, but using it strategically is just as important. And hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a quick question about the slide you had about like building up to your kind of race day amount. So there was I think a bullet point in there that said like start 10 weeks before and then build up to like race day plus 20% intake. Is
Yep.
the idea that like across that 10 weeks, kind of every long run should be like a slight increase until you hit that 20%, or should it be over like every 2 weeks you should build up? Is there like a recommendation for that?
Um, Basically, if you go up to 70, just keep 70 per hour for a couple of weeks, and then when you're moving up to 80 an hour for a couple of weeks, So, and particularly on the run, it's good for you. It's good that you've identified the run because most people can get their carb intake increased on the bike, but on the run is much more difficult. So that's where I would concentrate on it, on the run. Um, because if you do it on the run, the chances are it's going to be no problem on the bike. But yeah, take your time over it. Give yourself 2 weeks when you go up 10 grams. Let your body settle and then just go up to the next one. Don't rush it, because you'll be doing 2 weeks at 80 and think, yeah, I'm fine with this. Don't force it to 90 immediately. Let that settle in and then go to 90, and then do that for 2 weeks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any,
Any
anyone else? I know Braulio said he had one, but he might be busy.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Like, yeah, so yeah, I have a question because Mark yesterday posted something on Instagram around like the longer is your effort, like you need to increase the glucose to fructose ratio. And I know like that Precision use like 1 to 2.
Yep.
So is like what's your take on this? Like, I got very interested because, like, I love the precision gels. Actually, like, I love it. Uh, it's just curious.
That's a very good question. It's a great segue for this particular component, the gut training. So, and it's one thing I've overlooked in talking today. So thanks for reminding me. Yes, fructose to glucose is a very important as you increase your carb intake. Now, the reason for that is, as you point out, most modern companies, ourselves, SIS, Morton, most companies that back, using science to inform their products, use a roughly 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose. And it's not the exact ratio that the science identifies, but it's good enough for most people. And the reason we use that ratio is because we have two pathways in our stomach to absorb carbohydrates or sugar molecules. We have a pathway for glucose and a pathway for fructose. And it's roughly a 2-to-1. So if you're trying to get in 90 grams, if you try and pump in 90 grams of glucose, your stomach, and again, everyone's different, but your stomach is likely to sort of block up and not be able to absorb those 90 grams. But if you give it to it in 60 grams of glucose, 30 grams of fructose, the better chance your stomach and your gut is able to absorb it. And when you're trying to pump in 90 grams of glucose only, is often when people get these gastric distress problems when they're trying to increase their carb intake. Because what happens is, you're putting in 90 grams of glucose and you might absorb it, for the first hour when your body's fresh and everything's happy. But the next hour, as you get fatigued, and especially as your sodium levels drop, you might only absorb 70, and the next hour, only 60. And what happens is you get this bolus of undigested glucose or carbs in your stomach. And that's when we get the classic bloating and gastric distress, and when we get that, it's usually going to come out of our body via two methods, front or back. So it's very, very important as you're increasing your carb intake to be aware and to look on the back of the packet and make sure whatever product you're using is formulated in roughly a 2-to-1 ratio. If you're only taking in 60 grams an hour, you don't have to worry about it too much. But as you get to those higher levels, definitely bear in mind that is an important factor. So very, very important question. And I didn't mention it, so thank you very much for reminding me.
All right. That might be it then. Cool.
Okay.
Well, sweet.
So all of you, through Mark, you have our contact details, and be aware that, if you want to talk to one of us, we do free video calls, 20 minutes. They often go longer. You can book it anytime. You can have multiple video calls, and you can talk about yourself as an individual. It's very, very important that my presentation is generic, but you've got individual needs. So you can go online, book that call with one of our sports scientists, and talk through your particular race, your particular issues, and they'll give you a recommendation of what might help you. And they're all experienced athletes and scientists, so they have extensive experience. So I would make full use of it if you're that way inclined, and get a little bit more information that's personal.
Take advantage of it, guys. So much good stuff out there from Precision, so let's soak it all in. All right, thanks so much, Sean. I'll post up the recording in case anybody wants to pan back and relook at any of the slides and stuff. I'll post that up in our group later, so keep an eye out for that. But thank you so much again, Sean, and we'll get you on here for another one in a little ways down the line.
Happy holidays to everybody, and Happy New Year, and good luck with your winter training.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye.